Sometimes I'm angry. That might be clear. I'm angry with programming for being so selfish. But sometimes I'm also like, but my good friends, you don't know what you're missing. Sex is great, but have you ever made something for someone that they really, really like using?
Hey folks, welcome back to Elm Town. I'm your host, Jared M. Smith. We'll be visiting with Felienne Hermans today. But first, let's talk about our sponsor, Logistically. At Logistically, we make intuitive software to help logistics teams make better decisions and improve efficiency. We build the front end for all new features in Elm. If you're interested in our mission and enjoy writing Elm, please drop us a line, elmtown@logisticallyinc.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. Now, Felienne. Felienne is a professor of computer science education at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. She also works as a high school CS teacher 1 day a week at Lyceum Kralingen in the Codasium program. Felienne is the creator of the Hedy programming language, a gradual and multilingual programming language designed for teaching. She is the author of The Programmer's Brain, a book that helps programmers understand how their brains work and how to use it more effectively. In 2021, Felienne was awarded the Dutch Prize for ICT Research. She also has a weekly column on BNR, a Dutch radio station. Felienne gave the talk, How to Teach Programming and Other Things, at Strangeloop 2019, where I first discovered her work. She recently published the paper A Case for Feminism in Programming Language Design, co-authored with Ari Schlesinger. As discussed in Elm Town 59, Elm Camp with Katja Mordaunt, Felienne worked with Katja on Code Reading Club. Felienne, welcome to Elm Town.
Very nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So I wanted to start out with this by talking about my series of learning, teaching, and I've come to have this word to describe it as wonder. And by that I mean a curiosity of asking why. And with that, I have a couple of things. One of them just happened to be this morning. I do this daily little ritual of reading a little passage from the Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman, and then journaling. And one of them, this one today in particular, made me think about something from The Programmer's Brain. So let me start with the quote from the Daily Stoic, which is, quote, "When it comes to money, where we feel our clear interest, we have an entire art where the tester uses many means to discover the worth. But when it comes to our own ruling principle, we yawn and doze off, accepting any appearance that flashes by without counting the cost." This is from Epictetus, from Discourses 1.20.8 to 11. And just a little bit of context about Epictetus, was I don't know the time period, but a long time ago, a slave who later became sort of well-known for teaching Stoicism. And that made me think about this passage from chapter 7, page 119 of The Programmer's Brain. You wrote, quote, "The fact that knowledge you have already learned needs to be changed in your long-term memory makes conceptual change learning harder than regular learning. This is why misconceptions can linger for a very long time. Simply being presented with information on why your thinking is wrong often does not help or does not help enough." So with that kind of setting the tone here, what do you think are the costs of misconceptions? And I'm thinking about this from a sort of feminist lens, and you can kind of take that wherever you want to go there.
Yeah, firstly, I was just appreciating. I think this was the first time someone read a line from my book to me. So it's just so weird because it sounded really like me, but also it was your voice. So it's just like, I'm just experiencing this moment. It's still a mystery to me, right? I wrote this book mainly in COVID, so alone in my outdoor office. And now I know people hold it. They bring it to me. They're like, "Oh, this is your book." It is still amazing that those things I wrote in the pandemic are now in your hands, like literally. So I just want to take a moment to, no, I am having feelings and they're great feelings. But I think, changing your mind is so hard. Because if you have to change your mind, you have to disagree with your prior self. right? And maybe this was something you were really, really attached to, right? Maybe your favorite programming language, I don't know, it was Pascal or something. Pascal was one of my favorite languages when I was younger. And then at one point, you sort of have to reckon with the fact, oh, well, there are other languages that are maybe better in a certain way. And then that means that your prior self is also changing. And then maybe switching programming languages is, so for some people already, something they're very, very attached to. But realizing sort of you were wrong also means that you were a person that was wrong. And that's just something that's really, really painful. And then you have to be in this new mindset of, okay, now I believe in new things. Do you know Science Mike?
No, I don't think so.
We can probably put him in the show notes. He is someone that grew up with a religious background, believing certain things, and then he became really interested in science, and now he's doing science podcasts. And one thing he says about making that switch from someone that believes certain things in a religious way, growing up like that, to someone who sort of believes in science, whatever that means, he says, it is like you have to find a new group of people to belong to. And I thought that was so nice and so beautiful, that if you have to change your mind, you have to find new people that are your tribe. And specifically, if you grow up in a certain community, this is also why Science Mike, I think, resonates so much with me. If you grow up in a certain community, but no one is like you, then who's your new tribe, right? So when I was growing up, and then, I mean, until one of my 30s, computer science was mostly men. Maybe it still is mostly men. So I couldn't really hang out with other women in computer science because there just weren't so many. So it really took me a long time with respect to my feminism and the role that my feminism has in the computer science space to find people to feminism with, right? Because it's really hard to do with dudes. Not that there aren't, of course, feminist men, but they don't have my lived experience where in dozens of occasions, I was one of the few women in a room at a conference, in a meeting, right? So it was very hard, and really I was so happy that I ran into Ari, who I wrote the paper with, because that was someone like, oh, now I have someone to belong to or to belong with in this journey, and that was very important. And I think that was an enabler, to come back to your question, an enabler of, for me, a conceptual change from, I don't know why everything is so hard, like, oh, now I know why everything is so hard.
Yeah, that's really good. I wrote down the word tribe and then you said it. So I think that's a great thing to kind of jump off with there. And I think that resonates with me from, you talked about programming languages and, believing that one is, kind of where you're, of course, it's what you work in, but maybe it's kind of like where you're, like you're aligned with it, right? Like your beliefs sort of align with the beliefs of that language and the sort of like the values around that language. And that, for me, was, before I came to Elm, was JavaScript. And I had this sense, I worked in other languages, but then I came to JavaScript and I was like, okay, I can get in with this. And for whatever reason, I enjoyed it. I think mostly because I could use it on the front end and get that immediate feedback. And then at some point I discovered Elm, and I went to a conference and I met the people, and they were so open and so kind and inclusive and diverse. And it was just a really pleasant experience. And I didn't really know much about the language when I went. I knew that I liked the properties of it, but I didn't know that I would be able to use it in a production setting, use it for work. Now, fast forward 7-8 years later, I mean, I do get to use it every day for work, so I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, it makes me feel like I had to overcome some bit of self, like this ego, I guess, of like how I looked at myself, and then also, and I probably didn't think about it in these terms at the time, but within the context of the system, the values of that system that I was working in. So yeah, I like that a lot. With that in mind, I just shared a little bit about sort of my history and coming from different languages. Would you talk a little bit about sort of your journey, how you got started in computer science, sort of what was your spark, And this question comes a bit from Benjamin DeVries. He helped me come up with this idea. And he said, what sparked your initial interest, and what challenges and achievements did you have along the way? And then sort of my phrasing is, what social or systemic blockers did you face, or feminist lenses to view those challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. So sadly, this is all lost to history because I don't know how I started programming. It is so long ago that I don't really remember a time before programming. So what my parents could puzzle together is that probably when I was around 6, we had a computer in the house. My dad had his own company that he was just running from the house. And he's not alive anymore. But what we sort of remember is that people told him then, computers are the future. Frans, you need a computer for your business. So he was sort of coerced into buying one. But we think he never used it in his entire life really to do much for his job. Maybe write letters, but he could already write letters before. But as soon as we had this computer in the house, I was just hooked. And in the beginning, I did the silliest things, like just print the alphabet in different fonts. This was already enjoyable. Have like a Paint. I don't think it was literally Microsoft Paint, but a Paint-like program where you could sort of draw things. But of course, it wasn't a GUI yet. There was no Windows. This was in the DOS times, but you could sort of make drawings. And this was already fun and magical. It was this magical machine for creation. And I think that's mostly what appealed to me. And of course, at one point, computer games started circling around on floppy disks. And then you would just exchange them with your friends. And then we figured out a game is made by code. And then you can open it and then you can look at the code. One game that I had was called, many people my age probably know this, Gorillas. .bas, like from BASIC. And it was like a gorilla and it threw a banana and then the banana exploded. That was the game. And you could open the code and you could change things. And then the game would change and there was this magical layer of creation. And I like creating many things. I like making clothing. I like drawing. So this was just for me another way of making stuff. And I thought, oh, look at all the possibilities that this machine allows me to create. So this was all when I was still in elementary school, so before I was 12. And then I went to high school, and I was, I think, very, very lucky that my high school had a computer club. I think had I gone to a different high school that didn't have a computer club, my life would have been different. But this computer club, every Thursday in lunch break, all the computer kids from the school would go to of course, the math teacher's classroom, and we would do computer stuff there. And some of it was just playing games and exchanging games and burning music on CDs. If you're in your 40s, you know what that means. If you're like younger, you're like, what is burning music on a CD? What does it mean? But also some of the kids were also into programming. So it was not really a programming club, but it was. But as a teenager, I still liked many things. So I also liked philosophy. I was in the school band. I was in the theater club. So I liked many things. And I was in doubt for a very long time, what should I do? But then my working class mom said, well, honey, you can do theater and philosophy on Saturday and have a nice career with a good salary as a programmer. And the opposite will be harder to achieve. Which is, it's sad that we live in a capitalist system, but of course also she was not wrong, right? My financial situation was probably very different had I chosen theater or philosophy. But I did think that financial motive, which wasn't necessarily my own financial motive, I didn't really understand that super well when I was 18. And that did ultimately sort of push me or guide me towards computer science.
So you had this experience that you described as magical, and it brings me back to that word of wonder, and this sense that what brought you in was the ability that not only could you interact, but you could change the way that it worked.
Yeah. And I think also in your previous question was this feminist lens that I didn't really answer, I'm realizing now, but I can now do that from that perspective. So I think when I started to study computer science as an undergrad and then a master's and a PhD, I don't think that creation was that big of a part of the deal. Because if you study computer science, you don't do that much creation. You do some programming, but the programming, I didn't see this when I was doing it, right? I was super excited about programming, so I was having a great time. But what was the programming? Oh, let's print all the prime numbers. Let's reverse a linked list. Here's a text file, and you have to find the largest alphabetically ordered substring in this letter soup. And I didn't think of it then. I just thought, oh, well, I want to be a programmer. This is what you have to do. I absolutely didn't hate the type of things I was doing. So I don't want to unfairly retcon and say, oh, it was super shit. It wasn't shit. I was having a good time. But looking at it now, what brought me in computing wasn't what I was presented with while I was in it. And over time, the system of power, so to say, or at least the vibe, as kids would say now, the vibe of being a programmer wasn't about creation. And certainly it wasn't about creating things that other people like. So if you make a drawing, you can make something for yourself, but usually it's for other people. And specifically, if you make clothing, you make clothing for yourself, but you might also give it to other people. So for me, always creation has this gift in it, that I want to create something partly for me, of course, but also partly for other people. And I see now that what computer science is, also if you're a professional programmer, not just in your studies, is much more about what you find enjoyable, about the challenge. And this is also what I write in the feminism paper, that Dijkstra, my fellow Dutch person, famous computer scientist from the Netherlands, he says, mathematicians will find challenge in computer science. So this challenging, and I think that is so much part of our culture, maybe less so the Elm culture, but of course more so the culture of other programming languages, where ultimately, of course not all programmers always ever, right? But a lot of programmers are in it for them, because they know this will be fun and challenging. And then maybe a little bit like I was in it, it's a good career. But I don't think many programmers are in programming because they like creating for other people. They like the creation and in the way that you might solve a puzzle, right? Or that you might do a crossword, a puzzle like this, or an actual puzzle that you put together, or a Rubik's Cube, that they like the challenge and then it's finished. And then it's not something you give to someone. It's not like you finish a crossword and then you're like, hey, Jared, look what I made for you, right? So it's much more about the challenge for you than about the creation process. So that lately I feel that I'm getting annoyed if people say, oh, programming is so creative. Like, no, you literally have to follow the rules that the programming language designer put in. Maybe if you make your own programming language, but even then, that there is creativity, but it's so constrained. And it's not creativity in the sense that you are creating a gift for someone. And this is something I was just telling Ari, the co-author of the paper the other day, that I feel a bit like Science Mike, that I've been in a cult for 20 years and I'm now sort of getting out. And I'm like, why did I agree with that? Why did I let all that creative spark that I had as a teenager, it sort of just withered away? Because I was hanging out in this culture where all the other students and the professors and everyone in the profession were like, yeah, this is a fun puzzle. Like, but wait. Now I realize I don't care about that. I don't hate it. Like, I don't hate reading a complicated knitting pattern, but I don't like reading the pattern for itself. I like the picture that's next to the pattern that says, this is the sweater you will have. And then the challenge is a necessary step. But it's not that if I figured out the complicated pattern, I'm like, now I'm intellectually satisfied. No, I still want the sweater.
Right. Yeah. This makes me
think that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think about this from the perspective of, you said, like, different ways and like reasons for creating. And it makes me think about creation with, in one regard, the goal is to complete a challenge or to dominate something, right? It's like to be, complete this and say, I've made it to the top of this precipice. I won. And the other purpose, a gift, is a form of communication. Or even if you're wearing your own clothes, you are still communicating something with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely see that difference there in how, and actually it makes me think of an episode, or actually a couple of episodes of Elm Town, one before I was the host, but both were with Martin Stewart, who he would make Elm programs as gifts for folks. And that just, popped into my head is something that...
Oh, that's so
really
cool. I should totally listen to it. Like, do you remember an example of a thing he made as a gift?
He made something for some friends for Christmas, I believe. And then...
I love it.
And then a game for his sister, I believe. And I don't remember the name of the game, but really interesting. And then after hearing that, I ended up making one Elm app as a gift, a Christmas gift. It was one of those like Friendsgiving things.
Yeah.
And it was like a compilation of local music, but it was all ones that you could find like streaming either on YouTube or, SoundCloud or something like that, as a gift. And so, whoever got to see that website with the local music. So, yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. But that's also so different from something like Advent of Code or, you should have your own hobby project, right? But it's never a hobby project in that sense. It's and then you learn a new language that you don't know, and then you know the thing, and then you can feel really proud of yourself.
Yeah, with this in mind, kind of thinking about creation and the different purposes of it and programming, what's the importance of understanding systemic biases in quantitative over qualitative work?
Yeah, so bias is so hard to capture. What does bias mean? But I think what I learned from developing Hedy mainly, so it's a programming language made for kids. And at one point I asked a bunch of 12-year-olds, how shall I change this, right? If you had the power to make one change, what would you do? And these were Dutch high schoolers. And at that point, we didn't have localization yet. So we had localization of the UI. And so you could click a button and it would say, voer de code uit, instead of run the code in Dutch. But the language itself, the keywords were not localized. So the kid said, why don't you make it in Dutch? And this wasn't a big sample size, right? I didn't ask 1,000 kids. I asked, I don't even remember, let's say 50 kids. So I wasn't aiming for a good, fair sample. I was just interested in a broad variety of opinions. So this kid said, make it in Dutch. And then that was uncovering such an interesting bias, because making the keywords English wasn't a decision. I hadn't sat down and thought, oh, do I make it in Dutch? Do I make it in English? I hadn't even thought of it. I just programming languages are in English. It's just the thing you do. So that was a bias, but I hadn't even seen it as a bias. And I think maybe that's the more interesting bias, just really finding something you didn't think of. And of course, this is, once we started to implement Hedy in Dutch, we got Spanish and French and German. We got all those extra languages in. And people got so excited, so much more excited about Hedy than they were before. Only then, or maybe I should say only now, because I'm still realizing it more and more, I understood the value. But this was just one child in a small study. So it doesn't matter, right? This could also just be an outlier if you think of it's important to collect a lot of data and go on that. And I'm of course not saying you should never collect data, but sometimes one sentence you hear or read just changes the course of your life. And there was just this one boy, and he was also a bit smug about it, because he was like, so I said, why, right? He said, well, you made it like this, you can make it different. And it was just so good. And it was really like life-changing. And also, it was so much created by communication, because this was a 12-year-old. And I was willing to sit down with a 12-year-old and to listen to their inputs. And that was sort of necessary to even get the information. And I will definitely admit on air that at first I wasn't so excited. I was like, why? Is this really necessary? I also thought this will be a lot of work to build. And who has to build it? Well, me. So I wasn't immediately swayed. It wasn't like light came from the sky and it was like, oh, no. I was like, nah. So it took me time, coming back to your first question, it took me time to realize how important it is. And of course, over time, specifically, and I've talked about this in many other venues as well, when we started to move from Latin languages to Arabic and Chinese and Hindi, but specifically Arabic, because it was so different. All the linguistic concepts that I knew were different. So the farther away we were getting from Dutch and English, the more convinced I was becoming. And so it was I'm agreeing with myself. It's the easiest thing. But I'm agreeing with myself in the book that you were just saying that it isn't you change your mind, bam. It's still an ongoing process in which I have to unlearn that programming should be English.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in there, I believe you say that those older concepts, they can come back. They aren't just poof gone and completely changed. It's actually that sometimes we revert back to those old mental models, right? So,
yes. And they change as well. So for me now, keywords means a different thing, right? It's not that I don't talk about keywords anymore, but now if I think of the keyword, just if I think of print as a keyword, like print hello world, I don't just see print. I also see affiche in French and cool in Arabic. So the concept has deepened and widened. It has become something different. And then the old mental model also becomes limiting. If I now look at a programming language that's only in English, what a small language. I want to have this bigger, richer variety of different languages. And in the Hedy, you're even allowed to mix different languages together. So you can program in different natural languages. We don't care. We allow you, because so many people are, also not my idea, something someone told me, but someone, Marcus Dial specifically, told me, like, Felienne, some people are bilingual. So you don't want to have English or Spanish. He was specifically talking about Spanish speakers. He says, many people, they don't speak English or Spanish. They speak both languages. And also in a programming context, they will want to mix and pick the language, the natural language that fit them most in the sentence. So that's why we also allow like this bilingual form of programming. So the same concept just becomes a different form of the original.
Yeah. Spanglish.
Yes, Dunglish you can say about Dutch. But mostly if people say Dunglish, they mean like I speak English, like the pronunciation isn't really perfect.
Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah, but I like that. It's like, it makes me think of the phrase that Bell Hooks uses about consciousness raising.
Yeah.
About how you are now have a wider view, as you said, of when you think of that. You don't just think of it in this one small box. Now that is a much larger thing of thinking about. So yeah, very neat. Okay. So then this makes me think about, we're talking about Hedy here. How did your experience, like, why did you choose to make this syntax, this, you can kind of explain a little bit what this is, the sort of adaptive design of it that makes me think of how, like, Super Mario Brothers is a game that when you start out, you only have to know a couple of things, and as you go along, it sort of builds up the set of things that you need to do in order to get to the next level. So it's sort of like you learn a new concept, but it's not suddenly at the very beginning you need to know all of the concepts. It's like at the beginning you only need to know how to move left and right and then jump. So yeah.
Yeah, I love it how you pick Mario there as an example, but many things are like this. Also, natural language learning. You don't have to do big sentences with sub-sentences and articles and verbs and nouns, right? In the beginning, you could just do letters and then you do words. And the same is true for math. First, you learn counting, and then you learn adding, and then you might learn multiplication and subtraction and division. So it goes slowly. And what I realized when I was failing teaching 7th grade for a while is that if you learn programming, you just have to learn too many things at the same time. So something simple in Python, even just printing, it's like print and then brackets and then quotes and then in it, hello world. That's just many, many things. And if you mess something up, then it doesn't say, oh, little mistake, no biggie, I will fix it for you. It says syntax error, and then usually it's like red letters with a lot of jargon in it as well. What is syntax? Right? Error, maybe most kids know, but syntax, what is syntax? What is parsing? What is even an unmatched quote? What does that mean? So I just saw a lot of kids hitting this syntax barrier. And of course, it's not a problem if learning is hard. Learning is hard, life is hard, things may be hard. But this wasn't useful hard. And so many kids said, why do I have to put the brackets there? Why do I have to put the quotation there? And then I had to say as a teacher, well, either I had to explain them why, but then you're giving a compiler scores, because then you have to say, right, it's important for the computer to know what goes with what, etc. Or you have to say, well, don't think about it. Just do what I tell you, which also isn't didactically a really valid way, because it's just not so encouraging. And then I just thought, why are programming languages like this for learning? If you're just interested in doing print hello, you can just do print hello. You only need the brackets if you want to have multiple arguments. And you only need the quotation marks if you also have variables, because if everything is a string, nothing needs quotation marks. And I just thought, well, I know how to build programming languages. In my PhD dissertation, I had also worked on programming languages, and I had always been very excited about building programming languages, maybe because it's the programming where there's most freedom in creation. I don't know. I just thought, I can build a programming language that just removes all the syntax in the beginning and then adds a little bit and adds a little bit and adds a little bit. And after a few semesters of just failing to get the 12-year-olds excited about Python, except for the ones that were already excited about Python, I thought, well, I know how to build a programming language. These are dangerous words. I thought I will just build a tiny prototype just to show that it can be done. Whoops.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Just a prototype. It's only a prototype. Yeah.
And now currently, I don't remember the last time I checked, we supported 69 different natural languages. We have hundreds of thousands of users every month. It's crazy. We get emails from like Botswana in the south of Africa. Indonesia, I was running a code camp like literally the other week, where they send us pictures of 90 kids in Indonesia programming in a natural language I had never heard of before. It's wicked.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's amazing. And when did you start building Hedy? When did you create that prototype?
End of 2019. So the Christmas break of 19 to 20. So that's like 5.5 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's great. And this makes me think you're talking about error messages. There's a little bit in there. This relates to Elm. So, folks, we've been talking for a bit here, and I'll bring it back a little bit here to Elm. In A Case for Feminism in Programming Language Design in 2.1, there's this part that says, a recent study on error messages in Elm showed that their well-phrased error messages were the most named positive experience of professionals working with the language. And I think I can agree with that. You know, from my experience, it's one of the things that's really wonderful. And of course, it's designed to be great for folks who are beginning, right? Like for beginners, but it's not only for beginners. It's, and this is something that I think we talk about, you know, systemic values. It's something that seems like it has to be overcome for folks to recognize that this is something that can also be valuable. You know, like I said, 8 years or so that I've been writing Elm now. And I still find it valuable because I use it as a guide instead of a blocker, right? So it's like, okay, I want to, I talked about this just the other day. At the end of the day, what I like to do is, so I know where I'm going to start the next day. I don't have to build up all this context in my brain, right? I can say, I'm going to put a little compiler error right at this point in the code. And maybe I'll put something in there that'll tell me like, this is where I'm going to be going next. And that will sort of be the jumping off point, for my brain to say, okay, here you can kind of boot up from here. And then if I'm coding throughout the day, and of course, I could just make a mistake, but sometimes I'll use it intentionally. Like I'll expect an error message. And this is much different than before I used Elm, where whenever I would work, I would not save or not rebuild the application until I had, did a fine tooth, review of all the code and made sure, okay, this is going to work, because I didn't want that ugly message to tell me how wrong I was. I find it to be just so much nicer in that regard.
It is so much nicer. And this, I think, one of the findings of the paper, or actually I should say one of the findings that Ari already in her study on Elm had found, is that at least in the academic setting, you are allowed, everyone can do what they want, but you're allowed in sort of the cultural sense to study error messages for novices. So there's a lot of work on error messages for kids, for beginners, for non-professionals. But studying error messages for professionals, Ari was sort of the first one that really looked at how professional programmers struggle with error messages or appreciate error messages, because there is this assumption that programming should be hard, that it is like a puzzle. So of course, professionals are going to be fine with syntax error, unexpected EOF, because they're professionals. But why? Very often now that I work with Hedy, I use Hedy myself, and then I get an error message that is a sentence in Dutch. I actually like this. I prefer an error message that is a sentence. I prefer an error message that is in Dutch. English doesn't come easy to me. It is not my first language. So this assumption that it has to be hard is also annoying if you're a programmer. Of course, I can deal with error messages, but I don't want to.
Yeah, and this makes me think about, you're talking about the this idea that it has to be hard, and I'm thinking about like, why is that? Why does it have to be hard? And of course, there's this system of values, and it makes me think like, why did I avoid those error messages? And I think that a bit of it's maybe this sense of like shame of like that I did something wrong for failing, right? Like this ability, or this idea that like, if I don't complete the challenge, right, then I've failed, and it is this feeling of shame that I'm trying to avoid. So I wonder, just kind of coming to me, but also I think based on, I've been reading The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, and thinking about that from that perspective of like masculinity, and how this idea of like feeling shameful and how to avoid that, and where even anger comes in as a tool to destroy that emotion. So yeah, interesting. Let me ask you about the programming language community and how it affects learning. There's this other quote from A Case for Feminism in Programming Language Design in 1.2, which says that a central principle in feminism, particularly in feminist philosophy and feminist science and technology studies, is that knowledge is shaped by the context in which it is made, by the people who are creating knowledge, and that knowledge shapes our world. Could you talk about that, about the community and how that affects learning context?
Yeah, definitely. So we can go back to our previous point on hard is valuable, and we like things to be hard. So if you like things to be hard, then you get really hard programming languages, if that's what you celebrate. And maybe you get really complex codes. And of course, now a lot of people, sometimes these people send me emails. They say, yeah, but I like really simple code. And I like many people that like simple code. It's like, yes, this is true. But by and large, our field, we all, I think, feel this, that our field does value complicated work. This is what we appreciate, and that having something that is readable has to be fought for, has to be argued for. Why do we have to do this refactoring? Why do we have to write documentation? Why do we have to make it understandable? So I do think a lot of that comes from a lot of programming languages, and the way code bases are organized comes from a value system. And also in terms of who gets to participate in programming language creation, I think one of the most shocking things that just I didn't know when I started to make Hedy in Arabic is that hardly any programming languages can deal with anything in Arabic. So Arabic uses different numerals, so different characters for numerals, where English or Dutch would use a 5. This is like a 5. In Arabic, there's a different symbol. It's called hamze, and it looks like a 0 for me and for people like me. So it's definitely different characters. So firstly, I didn't even know this. So for 35 years, I didn't know Arabic numerals were not the numerals I knew. We call our numerals Arabic numerals. They are not. Even though I knew Roman numerals, most people in the Western world will know Roman numerals. Why is this so important? We all know them at least a little bit. And then 300 million people use different numerals in Arabic. We don't know this. And elementary school didn't teach me this, but also all the compiler courses I took in university never taught me this. You look at the Dragon book, which is a famous book for making programming languages, and it just said digit 0 to 9, my 0 to my 9, and their 0 to their 9, but not Suffer to Tissa, which is Arabic 0 to 9. So first I was like, wow, no one knows this. That is peculiar. To come back to your theme, I'm wondering why this might be. And then I tried it. I just literally tried, do other programming languages, if I just do print ethnin watissa, so this is 2 plus 9 in Arabic, what happens? And I checked the whole top 10 Tayobi index, and all of them crash, or like give an error message, right? All of them fail. And they all do it in horrendous way if you think of people you're communicating with people. Like Python says, invalid character. What do you mean, invalid character? This is my number. So I have this screenshot, right? I'm now visualizing it, of course, in front of me. You can also try it. Invalid character. And this is not a technical problem, right? This is a cultural problem, because that screenshot, what does this tell us about us? What can we learn about programming? Right. So firstly, we can see that it is populated by people like me that aren't Arabic, or any of the other numeral systems, Korean, Japanese, Chinese. They all have Hindi, different numeral systems. So the other people, they aren't there, and if they're there, they have to play by my rules. Apparently, in none of these programming languages communities, someone that isn't Western rose to the level of power where they're like, hey guys, or girls, but yeah, hey people, hey folk, maybe it would be fun if also my numerals were in there. So the fact that we have created this culture in which this doesn't exist, and I'm just talking about numerals. It's just numerals. I literally wrote a paper on this 3 years ago. There's like 11 other things you might want to localize, like gender and accents and all these other things. But just numbers, just that I can literally do 1 plus 1 in any numeral system. And that was just such a process for me, where I was talking about sort of leaving the cult, where the first step was, why don't I know this? Why hasn't programming told me this? And the second step was, why didn't programming give enough power to people that have this knowledge to share this knowledge with me? And then the third step was, I was still naive, and now this is like 3 years ago, or maybe 2. I thought, this is a mistake. It's just a coincidence that programming doesn't know this. I will just go tell people about it. I'll just say, hey, friends, hey, maybe you didn't think of this before, but it would be nice if we would also include these numerals and some other things for non-Western people. You would be just feel better for me. I think it's better for some people in those cultures. That would be maybe nice to also include these numbers. And I thought, again, I was very naive. I thought now programming, right now as a culture, they will say, Felienne, thank you. wow, we didn't know. We will absolutely immediately start implementing this because that's what I did, right? That's who I am. At the moment I figured it out, well, not the moment, but after after a while at least, I kept open-minded about it. And I thought, I have to build this. Now that I have this knowledge, I cannot sleep if I don't put this in Hedy. So I thought, I will give this gift also to other people. And then they'll be like, thank you, Felienne. We will go implement this right away. What a great suggestion. But that was not what happened. It wasn't even shrugging. It was like, nay, no. Why would we do this? This is ridiculous. They can just learn some English. This is not necessary. People really started to like push back. And then I thought, what? Who are those people? Why am I in here? I have nothing in common with people who do not think that this is a problem to be fixed. And then now suddenly, of course, it's not a puzzle, right? For me, when I saw this Arabic numerals problem, I thought, this is an interesting puzzle. I am partly triggered because I want to build it, but also partly because I think it will be an interesting challenge. So I was like, hey, people that like an interesting challenge, this is a very, very interesting challenge. It's super hard to build, but they didn't care. So it was also so very much then for me, this moment where I thought, right? And just I want to stress once more, not everyone. I know so many people who do care about this, and specifically in the Elm community. But I think it's easy for people, as soon as they can let this anger go that I'm talking to about them, they can see that this is the way our system works. I thought, for you, it's not about the challenge. It's only about the challenge that you have decided that you care about. Because here I'm presenting to you a very interesting and fun challenge, but you don't care about it because it's not for you. And I'm like, of course, this wasn't one day to the next. This went very, very, very slowly. But then at one point I just thought, I'm out. I don't want to with them people.
Yeah. I think the thing that it makes me think about is again, you and I both being part of the group that doesn't think typically about those differences, right? About the fact that a 0 or a 1 looks different and there are different words for it. And I think bringing this back to the way that this is a blocker, right, is that, why don't they just, right, is Evan Chiplicki would say. I think it was 2019 where he gave the talk about communities. And one of the things that he said was that sometimes folks would comment along the lines of, why don't you just do, and then, whatever the thing that they thought was the thing that he should do. Of course, why don't you just is a pretty loaded thing, which could involve, a lot of work that folks don't think about. So, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get to is it may not be common, but like in what way does it block folks, right? And how does it affect them? And so going back to the programmer's brain here, I want to ask about how language design choices affect cognitive load. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So we can sort of pick it up from the localization, because I think that's an easy place because we left it off there. That if a programming language has keywords in English, so it's like print. But of course, in many places, if you make software that isn't in English, which is in many places, a lot of the code base will be in the not English language. So in Dutch, for example, we have a text system, but the text system only exists in Dutch. So the strings are in Dutch and the variables are in Dutch. And that's still okay. But imagine you're making a system in Arabic. Then, of course, also your variable names, if your programming language allows this, but definitely your strings and your comments will be in your own language. That means that in one line, you have to switch keyboards because you have to type print in English letters, and then you want to switch to the string. And you only have one keyboard on your computer So in between, either you have to click with a mouse or you do a button press to switch to the other alphabet on the keyboard, and then you can do your Arabic string, and then you have to switch back for the quotes and for the closing. So if this is the way you program, this is annoying. This breaks your flow. This adds cognitive load because a bunch of times in a line, you have to switch, and that's just annoying. I think that for me was one of my an argument I had to learn from Arabic speakers. I was, of course, somewhat Western and somewhat imperialist, maybe. I thought also partly, I can definitely admit this, I will be helping them, right? Which is not a good way to think of it. But that's just also how white people in Western countries are raised. And I'm still unlearning a lot of things. I thought I will be helping them to make the language more for them. But of course, they don't need this help in the sense that otherwise they will not be able to understand it. There are hundreds of millions of programmers that don't have English as a first language. But this will always be annoying. That's always just a hindrance, just a little bit of extra work, cognitive work or automated mechanical work for the button presses that you'll have to do. And now I actually have learned Arabic through this project. I now know some Arabic. And I sometimes type in Arabic or in a mix of Arabic and English and Dutch with my friends who speak also those three languages. And I cannot believe how annoying it is to switch keyboards. And that is, I think, a great example of how a programming language causes extra thinking, extra cognitive load. And the nice thing of this example is also it doesn't do that for everyone, because you, Jared M. Smith, who I can guess your first language is English, you do not have this problem. And I had only very, very partly had this problem. So we're not even using the same programming language. But here, this is an example of how the design of a language makes you think of certain things. And just another example that people might be a little bit more familiar of, I used C# for a very, very long time, and then I switched to Python. And it has been maybe 10 years since I last touched C#. But still, if I make a for loop, if I'm looping over a list, I type, usually I hear it in my head, but often I also type it for each, because it's just a better keyword. For each, it makes a nice sentence. For each, something in something. But Python forces me to have a for loop that's for I and a for loop that is for customer in orders or something with the same keywords. And for me, not for everyone, of course, if you're a Python from birth, then you might not suffer from this. But for me, this extra cognitive load, because I always have to override this prior assumption that it is for each. And then my finger goes like FOR, and it goes to the space, it goes to the E, and I have to go, stop. This is the wrong letter. And that just in my specific case adds cognitive loads. So these are just a few simple examples from various different backgrounds where one programming language might make it easier for you to do certain things in a certain context if you're from a certain background, and it might be harder for different people.
Yeah, totally. And that makes me think about this episode I did of Elm Town with Tessa Kelly, and I started talking, and you kind of talked about it a bit here about how we sort of have this, or like I presented it in a way that made it sound like we were, saving somebody from something, right? Like this savior complex, right?
Yeah.
And then she was like, well, I try to think about it like I'm unblocking them, right? Like I'm just, you're not like, I don't know. I guess it's like that, trying to shed that ego again, going back to that, like, it's not about I, it's about we, right? And there's an imbalance when it's more difficult for somebody than it is for someone else. I mean, it's just,
and it's also just, I think, about making people feel seen. So now if I show Hedy in Arabic, if I do it in a talk, there's very often a few people that have Arabic as a first language. And so often they just come to me filled with emotion. They say like, wow, when I gave a talk at PyCon a few months ago, and a guy from Syria, he comes to me and said, I had never thought I would see a for loop in Arabic. I just didn't think this is the thing I would ever see. I hadn't like me, and he's even Arabic, right? I had never thought that could be an option, and it fills people with joy, and that's very different, of course, from this. He was a professional Python programmer. Certainly, he had not needed my help to become a programmer. He was doing fine, but still, he felt seen and he felt included, and the fact that I have made this for him fills me also with joy.
Yeah.
I sort of sometimes I'm angry. That might be clear. I'm angry with programming for being so selfish. But sometimes I'm also like, but my good friends, you don't know what you're missing. Have you, like, sex is great, but have you ever made something for someone that they really, really like using?
Yes, yeah. Finding that joy in the connection, the communication there. Yeah. That's nice. And so I again, talking with folks from the Elm community, they're going to be screaming at me if I don't mention it. And this often comes up, I think, on Elm Radio with Dylan Kearns and Jeroen Engels, where they talk about cognitive load. And with Elm, there's a good episode about ADHD and encoding, and how by the fact that Elm is a purely functional language, there are a lot of things that we don't have to think about when we're writing Elm because they're just impossible, right? Like the language makes it impossible to create a side effect. And the only thing that can change is what's returned from the function. So that's makes me think about that. And then this also makes me think about something from, I don't have the line of where it is, but in A Case for Feminism and Programming Language Design, you all talk about how programming was originally more female-oriented and then became male-oriented, and then specifically about mathematics. And I think this ties into Elm because we don't use words like monad typically to describe effects, but and it's a language like, not to pick on Haskell, but just an example of one, uses the word monad. And so that's like another sort of category theory concept that you would need to learn if you don't already know it in order to program in that language. So talk a little bit about that, about that sort of journey of programming languages.
Yeah, so I just I just read a very interesting paper on the history of COBOL. I will definitely email it to you if you want to put it in the show notes, where programming, indeed, programmer used to mean person, and it used to mean women, female person specifically, because programming, the labor division in the early computer days was men, mostly scientists, were building the computers and using them and making the programs, and they were just do it. Just here, women, put this in the computer, and it was seen as like secretarial work, just typing up the algorithm. And the men were doing the algorithms, and the women were doing the programming. But of course, quickly they realized that there was challenge also in putting it in the computer correctly. And in those early days, some programming languages were really designed by women, COBOL, for example, by women who valued communication. And these programming languages were very wordy. And then, of course, men wanted to make the programming languages less wordy and more mathematic. And it's very interesting that computer science, now I'm talking about the academic field of computer science, was a field without a home in the beginning, because it was an academic field. People in companies were building computers, people in universities were building computers. And then it was like, okay, but the study of these things, where does it go? And it was a bit of many different things. It was a bit of linguistics, and like Noam Chomsky, for example, but it was also a bit of like game theory and economics. Herbert Simon was a political scientist, but he also won a Turing Award and a Nobel Prize for economy. But you see how multidisciplinary those people were. And then it was, of course, electrical engineering, because people were building new computers and people were making programming language. But math at least the type of math that you mean if you say monad, right? Math wasn't actually so big a part of it in those early days of pioneering the computers. So now sometimes, very often actually, I think people say, oh, computer science comes from math. But that's not really true. Computer science, in the academic sense, doesn't come from anything. It was just a bunch of people doing different things. But at one point, some people thought, oh, well, we want to have this land in the university because it's a good source of money, because companies are making computers. Where does it go? And then the way that universities are organized and shaped are a field of study must land in something like the faculty of language or the faculty of engineering or the faculty of science. And the way, of course, the world is already organized is that science and engineering are seen as more valuable than linguistics or economy or language. And so it ultimately ended up in most places, either in the natural sciences or in engineering schools. And in that switch, programming or computer science became more math because it had to be math because it was in a science or engineering department. And of course, then you need math. You need math also to make the case. So people were making the case. I say this also in the feminism paper, that Dijkstra was making the case in 1973. He says, I'm arguing, I don't know the literal words, people can look it up, but he's saying something like, I'm arguing that programming should be seen as mathematical. But it is 1973, right? So this is 30 years after the first big computers. 20 years after the first compilers and the first programming languages. And now in the mid-70s, he's saying, we must understand programming as math. Okay, Edgar, but like, what were we doing then 30 years from now? Like, not math? So that definitely says something about how computer science wasn't originating from math, because then you don't have to say in the mid-70s, hey guys, let's make it math. And of course, also in that switch, of course, many other social dynamics as well. But in that switch also, programming was made male because now it was in an engineering school. And in this paper, I talk about Nathan Ensmenger. He's one of my scientific crushes. I like everything he writes. It's so good. So he writes that early computing was unusually open to women because it wasn't an established field. Because no one said, hey, ladies, in order to be here, you need to have a degree in something, because there were no degrees. So there wasn't a natural way of gatekeeping, because you couldn't easily say, oh, but you lack this and this and this, because no one had this and this. This and this wasn't invented yet. So in this formalization, also women were excluded, because then it was, hey, you cannot participate because you didn't go to engineering school. And now we are in engineering school, so now you need an engineering degree, or you need a math degree, or A-levels in math, or stuff like this. So the institutionalization also created these systems of power that enabled exclusion. I'm sure many of the men before also would have wanted to kick some women out, but there wasn't a system of power that they could point to and say, this is where you're not welcome here. And that became with this institutionalization into science and math. Sorry, this was again a very long answer.
No, that's great to get the full idea there, and I think that goes into more detail, than just what we will. I'll of course link to everything we talked about, but the paper, A Case for Feminism and Programming Language Design. So, yeah, this makes me think when you say like it needs a department, so it needs like a label is what it makes me think of. And it makes me think about this word, Japanese word, Kotodama, that I'm a fan of, and it's the power of words. And there's this question of like, what's the importance of a name? Like Hedy, for example. Like Hedy, that means something when you name a programming language Hedy. If you want to, explore and talk about it, or bell hooks, or effect versus monad, or Felienne even. So before we started, I was asking, should I call you Felienne or Felienne Hermans? And and that's partly because it's just something that I try to think about, like, you know, how do people present themselves? You know, what are their words?
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, there was this other, maybe people are, they know the Future of Coding podcast. I also very much like it. They had an episode on my paper. We can also link to it if people want. And they had a very long discussion about whether they should call me Hermans or Felienne. And they talked about this social dynamic that very often women are named by their first name, but men are named by their last name. And that, of course, is also a way of giving power or giving credits. That certainly if people would call me Hermans, or if they would call me Professor Hermans or Dr. Hermans, which is also my name in a certain system of power, it has a very different ring to it if people say, well, Felienne wrote, or if people would say Dr. Hermans wrote. And I don't care as a person, but I do care as a system of power. I do care if me and all my sister professors and doctors aren't named with their titles and their last names, but all the men are, then I do care about it, even if for me, I still, I don't force you to give me respect because I have a title. I prefer it if you give me respect because of the things I'm saying that might be interesting to you. But as a system of power, definitely. So this is also, when you were asking me this, I asked you, what do you do for other guests? Like, what do you normally do? And if you normally do last names, you should also do it for me, because otherwise we are together also contributing to a system of power that we don't like. At least I don't.
Yeah, I agree. And that's perfect. I was going to bring that up, that podcast episode. I was listening to that, and it made me think, they didn't bring up the thing that I think about. It's like a last name is, I mean, both names are given to us usually, but oftentimes the last name comes from, a male, father figure, patriarchy, name. And so that's something that I think about as like, I mean, it's obvious when you think about it, right? Like the power of, well, if you have this last name, then you must be blah blah's child, and and now you are
a wife.
Yeah. And yeah, so like that just, I don't know, it just irks me. It makes me want to change my name. It really does. It's like, it just feels so, I don't know, just out of control. And of course we have to accept that that's like the way it is in order to be able to do something about it. But yeah, it's just, it's really interesting. It creates a sense of wonder, of why
it
things
does,
are.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, my husband took my last name when we got married because it was more impractical for me to change my name because it is a name people know. But many people also find it, like, it also creates wonder. Whereas if I would have taken his name, I would be like, okay, normal, like you do it or you don't do it. And I was like, oh, wow, this is so special. Yes, so special that he did that for you. Like, you don't say that to female people that take the name of their spouse.
Right. Yeah. That's just the system. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And also I wanted to point out with names is like, we talk about male and female, men and women. And oftentimes in programming, we get in this like very like binary view of looking at things. And the reality is that the world is analog, right? And they mentioned this in the Future of Coding podcast episode that like, it's not even linear. Like it's, I don't know. I like to think of it as like, you could think of, it's like, I mean, it's multidimensional. It's quantum bit and superposition, it's like, I don't know. It's just, it doesn't have to be anyway. It doesn't have to be, if we keep an open mind about it. So I was just looking at week 6 of the AI news, from your blog.
Oh yeah.
And you mentioned that you might be switching to a dumb phone. This is kind of...
Oh yes, I will. It's arriving next week.
Tell me more. I'm curious about this.
What do you want to know?
Like, why, I guess, why are you switching to a dumb phone? What does it provide for you?
And so I don't know yet. We will see. But I think what is happening now to me and many people is, if wherever you are, you're waiting for the train, you're sitting having dinner, and someone goes to a toilet, then you grab your phone and then you go into the phone. Why, right? What is there? And then what you do? Well, in the before times, I was always on Twitter, and I had a lot of fun on Twitter. I learned many things there, but it's the default, and that also makes you not notice the world, right? If you're in a restaurant, you can also just look around, and that's also enjoyable. And we did that for how long do people exist? Mm-hmm. Depending on your perspective, 100 years, 10,000 years, 50,000 years. Noticing. And I think I learned this sort of from everything that happens everywhere. Noticing is great. It is great to notice things. And sometimes it can be great to notice things on the internet. So I'm not throwing away internet or my computer. But I want to notice with my full attention. I want to eat with my full attention. I want to read with my full attention. And I'm already sort of half switching because in preparation of not having a phone, I already almost deleted all of my apps from my phone. I do have an iPad, and then I have, of course, my banking app and stuff on my iPad. Maybe I'll go more hardcore later. But now I don't have anything already on my phone. It is already, my life is better because I notice things. And then if the train is late, then I just notice, you mentioned stoicism before. I'm like, I am annoyed. This is annoying. Why is the train always late? It is fine to notice feelings. It is actually healthy and good. It is not always healthy and good to think, scrolling. And I think maybe given current circumstances, scrolling is also not good. But just reading books. And then my new phone, my dumb phone, will be a half smartphone in that it will have podcasts, it will have directions, and a good camera. It's called Light Phone. They do not sponsor me. So it gives you the ability to listen to content, but with attention, and just this scrolling or checking your email. Now already, I'm like, why would I ever have done this? I'm just going out for a drink with friends and I'm checking my email. Why are you doing this? Because you're bored, and because you don't want to notice your body. You don't want to exist in the world. It's like when you used to smoke, when many people used to smoke, it's just like, lighting a cigarette. It wasn't even about, I really feel like having a cigarette. Or it's like you go drinking, you have 5 beers, and then after that, all bets are off. It's not with the 7th beer that you think, I'm really craving a drink. No, it happens, and it's this automatic system. And then the next morning, you're like, that was shit idea. And I think maybe after now years and years of scrolling on my phone all the time, I'm like, why am I doing this? And already I think I'm turning into a more interesting person. I started this newsletter in the beginning of this year, where every week now, I'm not doing it in English anymore because it's too much work. I only do it in Dutch. But every week I just write down stuff that I saw, and not in a one-line tweet like, look at me being snarky about the news. But I make time, because I'm not scrolling all the time, to read and engage and synthesize and have a long form of telling something. It is nicer and happier. And of course, this is like quitting drinking, quitting meat, quitting cigarettes. I'm like, why are all the other people not also in this beautiful world of not being addicted? I don't get it.
Yeah, thank you. That's makes me think of awareness, right? And like this
of noticing,
noticing, this sense of wonder, of being curious, and sometimes you need boredom. You need that lack of stimulation in order to be creative, right? In order to look at the world around you and recognize you're in it. And like you said, to deal with emotions, and to even going back to the programmer's brain, to go through the full semantic wave. Is that the right term?
Yes, where you learn a new concept, you mean?
Yeah. Where, like, as opposed to like scrolling, I like that, I don't like that, binary, view of the world, you take time if you encounter something that, oh, that's interesting. Let me think about that, right? And then
Yes.
and then you synthesize it with all the other knowledge that you already have.
Yes, exactly like this. And where also you notice confusion or you notice anger, and I mean, I am not a saint or anything. I used to do this for I don't know how long I was on Twitter, a decade more probably. That you read something, it makes you angry, and then your immediate response is to go on Twitter and say, this makes me angry, but snappier so that people start to follow you. Like, is that really the best thing? Like, anger is good, I think. And bell hooks, anger has a value, and it's okay to feel angry, but it's not always useful to immediately turn that anger into 140 or whatever character social media has. Sometimes it's good to just think, I am angry. And there is no outlet clip you can say in Dutch, like exhaust pipe. Like there's no way this anger can go now. It has to stay in me. It cannot go. And I can type something on my computer, but that doesn't really solve the problem. Just like feel the anger. That's okay. Have the anger. And then if every day the same thing makes you angry, maybe you can write a pamphlet, right? Or a letter to whoever is in a little bit more power. Maybe that is more useful. But if the only thing you do every day is on your phone, then it feels like you're dealing with your anger. And maybe you are, and it's absolutely fine if that is your way of dealing with the current world. No judgment at all. We have to do the things in the way that work for us in the current state of things. But it might also be that it will prevent you from doing other things.
Yeah, most definitely, right? Like attention is the commodity that everybody wants, and and if it's the superficial version of it, that we're not like, it's like we're, I don't know, apes just like bashing at the keyboard and yelling at each other, but not solving anything.
Yeah, and also. We haven't talked about AI. I'm not sure if I want to bring it up now, but I will because I can't help myself. What I also notice is that now that I'm reading more, now that I read books instead of scrolling, that reading is it's so great. It's like this one 12-year-old boy that says, oh, why isn't this in Dutch? That reading, sometimes also you read one sentence. And you're like, wow. Like one of the papers I was reading for the feminism paper, in the paper that I was reading is this sentence that women in computing, they feel like they have to be a programmer or a woman, but they cannot be both. And I was reading that, was like, wow, I feel so seen. And it wasn't about everything that was in the paper. It was an interview study, and I'm sure many of it was interesting, but I forgot every other thing. At least I don't know all the other things by heart. But just this one sentence, it's like, this is going in my heart. And then there's people, smart people, some of whom I appreciate in other facts of what they're doing. They will argue that you can use AI to summarize books or to summarize papers. And I'm like, only in a world that has already been destroyed by social media and capitalism and all the other things that have destroyed our world, can that sentence even be thought and uttered? Because if you are a person, and I wasn't always this person, for many decades I was not this person, but I'm this person now, so I will tell everyone. If you are a person that just genuinely enjoys reading books, then or papers, then the idea that it should be optimized is just inconceivable. These words make no sense. You might as well say, I want to eat a truck. They are words, but they make no sense. What will you eat? It is so magical where somehow we have gotten ourselves into a situation in which things that are enjoyable and that give value. It's just like looping it back to the beginning of this episode. When you were just reading my book to me, it's like, yes, that what is better than reading and gaining knowledge and having a connection, even though it's not us talking, but it is us talking. If you read my book, we are talking. And you can, in that way, you can talk. You can talk to Plato and Socrates and and Karl Marx. I was reading Karl Marx a while ago. I was like, wow, someone is seeing my struggle. It was so good. It is weird that we are now in this situation where people say that we can do it quicker. But why? It's like Soylent Green for thinking.
Yeah, the
but
focus
I like
is on yeah. Where the focus is only on the outcome and not on the process.
And also that it's not even the same outcome, right? Reading a summary doesn't have the same outcome as reading a whole book.
Yes.
It's not even the same thing.
No,
because you will miss out on these sentences.
Yeah. Creates like the brain just goes on like a baseline hum.
Yeah.
And all these things just kind of keep flowing in, but it doesn't actually do any thinking throughout.
And it's also very much this anti-feminist way of thinking almost, that you can separate knowledge from the knower. Right? Reading a book by Bell Hooks also means you have to reckon with what Bell Hooks is as a concept or what Karl Marx is as a concept. Those things cannot be separated. When was that written? Who is this person? Who are their parents? Or what community did they grow up in? Those things, you sort of have to also know these things. How did those people see themselves? How did other people see them? I always tell my students, sometimes they're really confused by stuff I have them read. And I always say, everything you're reading is an answer to something, but often you don't know what it's an answer to. Like all authors, they're always writing about things they have already read and internalized. And sometimes they make this explicit. Sometimes philosophy papers say, this is a response to, and that's very nice because then you know who they're answering. But very often, they're not really answering explicitly, but they are answering implicitly to someone.
Yeah. And you talk about the knowledge, who it comes from, and also as the one consuming it, right? Like my perspective reading Bell Hooks, or like our conversation where I said that maybe the error messages, I'm trying to avoid that sense of shame, comes from my perspective particularly, within, all the context of that. So yeah.
And also that's even this extra layer that you were mentioning. I was reading this book and I think, oh, I also read this book. And what person was I when I read this book? And if I would read it now, it would be so different, that it also creates a connection between people that they read the same book. Yeah.
And it makes me think of this idea of, we're so deep in philosophy here, I think. The idea that you never step in the same river twice. And it's like this idea that every time you read the book, it's like you have a different perspective. And
and that too is a nice feeling, right? How does it make you? And it can also be a sad feeling if you reread a book and you're like, wow, last time I didn't get anything, but at least I get it now. That too is a feeling that you would rob yourself of if you would read a summary. Because certainly, the summary is not so different if you read it in 10 years, a bit maybe, but definitely the whole book will be much more different than a summary.
Yeah, for sure. This is great. Well, I think we should probably...
You're like, I want to have 40 minutes of content. You invited the wrong guest, my good sir. We did 2.5 hours for Future of Coding. It went until midnight my time. It was crazy.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I guess, so to kind of it makes me think of, I guess, one other thing about AI, since we're on that topic. And really there are no limitations, only the ones that we set. So, you mentioned in one of those newsletters that there's this article, I think it's called The Age of Abundance.
Oh, it's so good. Everyone should read it. I love it.
I don't remember the author's name. Do you?
Laura Preston.
Laura Preston, yes. So I read that last night, and I don't know if it like literally made a physical change, but like I started feeling sick after reading it.
No, I get it.
And I might have just been, we were out right before, we're in like a flooding right now. But yeah, but I might actually be sick, but I feel like it really gave me this, and so I guess to folks, the idea is this journalist, Laura Preston, goes to this conference in Chattanooga, I believe, and it's about AI, and just goes and like talks to different people at different points. Her role in this conference is to be the
contrarian, I think.
Yes, contrarian at the end. Sort of like a token, like we
disagreeer.
Yeah, we brought somebody who disagrees, and yeah. But anyway, yeah, just reading that, it really gave me this not a good feeling, but I think maybe helped me helped verbalize the way that I do feel sometimes when thinking about some of these things. So it's a good read. We'll put it in the show notes. Felienne, what are your thoughts about it?
About the essay, you mean?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it is so good. You can continue reading it. And I think what's best about it is that it captures so well how AI people or AI creators or people that excitingly use AI, how they think. Like, what is the culture that they're coming from? And this is this question that I've sort of become accidentally obsessed with by building Hedy mainly, but the rest of my career before that as well. What culture do we have? What are the things we value? And that's sort of coming back to the smartphone story. In Preston's essay, it's so clear that these people don't care about attention, about noticing, about existing in the world with other people. This lingo, I don't know if this is like literally in the piece, but it is about like building a second brain or expanding your mind. It's like, but I already have a mind. I like my mind, and I want this one mind and this one body that I have that are connected to each other to exist in this world. And there's this feminist essay that I really, really like, or actually it's a book of a lot of essays. It's called In Praise of Messy Lives by Katie Royf. It's so much fun. It has nothing to do with AI, I promise. But it is in praise of messy lives. And she really talks about how a man and woman and 1.7 children family, how that's so constraining and how that makes life only possible in a certain way. And then she is praising a messy life. I think she has like 2 kids from 2 different men that she no longer lives with. And this is great, right? She's sort of embracing, this is how life happened for me. And maybe I would have envisioned something else, and other people have different things and that may work for them. But we have to deal with the reality that we are people, and that people have bodies and feelings, and they do unreasonable things, and then they make up, and they have friendships, and they have parties, and all of that is your life. And Preston's essay makes it so clear that whatever the culture of AI is, all those things that aren't ideal, right? Wouldn't I also sometimes wish I had no body and no emotions? That would be nice and efficient. But that is the way we are. And that is humanity. And that many of the people in AI, again, like in programming, this is not everyone, but it's very clear. Sometimes they say it literally, like Elon Musk says this quite literally. He would rather live in a world in which people have no bodies because you can just upload your brain to the clouds. It's like, no, none of this. Anyway, Sorry, I
Yeah,
brought up
that's-
AI. We should have said like trigger warning for AI upcoming.
Yeah. Well, it is messy, and life is messy, and AI, I think, I don't know what I think about it yet.
And that's okay.
I think that like all tools, they can be used for good and evil things and indifferent things.
Yeah.
And they are definitely shaped by the knowers, right? The people in power,
Yeah.
and they're shaped by the culture and the values of those folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we move on to picks?
Yes, let's do it.
What picks do you have for us today?
Well, you brought up an Age of Abundance, so that's cool. Can I do 2 books?
Yes, of course.
Okay, I was thinking about it because we were talking about Age of Abundance. There's a book by Tamara Nees called Dead Glitch. And it is very good. It is very weird. It is about how technology grapples with death. From what happens to your Facebook page when you die, who gets to maintain it, what are digital afterlives, what does that mean? So if you're interested in that, I'm sure it's really interesting. But it also is a very concrete way to look at what technology or what Silicon Valley thinks, what are their belief systems, in a very concrete case. So it's fun because it has all these very, very interesting questions. Like one part of the book talks about an elderly man dies and his 2 daughters go to his house and then the lights turn on at 7 p.m. and they turn off again at, I don't know, midnight. And they don't know how to turn it off because it's pre-programmed. And they don't know how to just stop that. And ultimately, they gain access to his Apple ID where it's all connected. And then in that process of also gaining access to his Apple ID, they also find his porn collection. And it's their dad. So this is so like, but this is technology. And this made so many great conversations happen in my household because we also have these automatic lights. So I was also telling my husband, like, how does that work? Right? I know how it works, but I mean, how do I get access to your things to turn off the lights and Alexa that's under your account? So it's these great, interesting questions, and it's just these fun quotes, air quotes, anecdote, like one after the other. We're like, wow, that makes me think. Wow, I had never thought of that. And in the undercurrent of this book is how does technology create things? So I can definitely recommend it, even if it's also a bit weird. So that was one. Okay. Can I move on to the other one?
Yes.
Yeah, so the other one is a very, very tiny book. It's like, I don't know, not even 100 pages. I'm waving it in the camera, but I guess most people will listen to this. And it's called The Crisis of Narration by Korean-German philosopher called Byung-Chul Han. And sort of the title summarizes the book really well. As humanity, we have a crisis of narration, meaning we aren't really encouraged to tell stories. We don't have systems where stories can be easily shared. And I think this book, there were many reasons that I wanted to get rid of my phone, but this book was also one of the reasons, where he says something very easy to remember that I really like. He says that Instagram stories are the opposite of stories. They are not stories. Because a story has a beginning and an end and an arc. And a story is something that is an experience repackaged. Whereas an Instagram story is not an experience repackaged. It's just an experience. It doesn't require you to pick the most important thing. You make a picture or you make a tiny video, hoppa. And part of humanity is what Han is arguing is reflecting and digesting and repeating an Instagram story after one day the story is gone. So it's not a story, because a story is something you can repeat and repeat and you can tell in a different shape. And there's all these wonderful books where you can practice to be a good storyteller, where it's just, you have to tell this story. A guy gets on the bus and he goes home. That's a story. Now you make this story in 100 different shapes. So stories in them have repetition and change. And you tell me a story. You already told me so many stories today that I now also own. And I can take your stories and I can make them my own. And then he's like, yeah, you can do that on Instagram stories. I can take your story and make more story out of it. But it's not interaction. It's not noticing. It's not adapting and repackaging in a meaningful sense. And then the book is a bit more bleak. I think maybe I'm mildly more hopeful that this can easily be fixed, because we can still change and we can make stories. And the book definitely was the reason that I started my weekly newsletter, because I thought, I have so many stories to tell and I want to put them somewhere, and not on social media. I want to put them on my own website that I own, because that also matters to me, because that's also part of my story. Anyway, it was a great inspiration, and it's very thin. You can sit down. If you do not own a smartphone, you can sit down and you can read it in one reading.
Okay. Yeah. So this book about the sort of death, or like maybe temporary, hopefully, of stories or narration. Yeah. Makes me think about the way that we tell ourselves stories. But then when you talk about the interaction of it, makes me think about how when it's put online, everyone has a way of interpreting it in their own way, right? But it's not, like you said, it's like if I tell a story, I might tell it in one way to you and another way to a different person. And there's a lot of context there, and there's a lot of communication and like connection, I guess, is the biggest thing, right? Of like,
yeah, and it requires effort also on the other side. If you tell me a story, I have to pay attention. Yeah. And even if it's a written story, a lot of people like practice reading stories. Oh, what do you think the author meant here? Oh, why would he write this? That it's active work that takes energy to read something deeply.
Yeah. That's great. I'll put that in the show notes, as well as Debt Glitch. And, of course, all the other things that we've been talking about.
I hope you wrote them down.
Yeah. I may be asking for help with some of them at some point.
Yeah, that's okay.
So did you have any other picks, or you said there were two?
Oh, yeah, I can do more, but I think this is enough. My students always tell me that every week in lecture I say, what are my favorite books? And then I do 2 or 3 of that a week. And then at one point, one of my students said, Felienne, they are all your favorite books. You cannot say every week, this is your favorite book. Just give us one book and then next week, one more book. So I think those 2 will do.
All right. Sounds good. Well, I have a book that I pick, and I've picked this before. It's called The End of This Day's Business. The cover is not very intriguing, but the subtitle is A Feminist Utopia. It's a novel by Catherine Burdekin. I'm not sure if I pronounced the name correctly, but it's set about 4,000 years in the future, and it's told. It's a third-person narrative, but there's 2 main characters. One is this mother who has a child, and it's adult child, and they're sort of talking, but then there's a lot of third-person narrative about sort of how it arrived at this point, and this point being where the world is ruled by females, by women, and that men are in a sort of their own utopia, but just like an ignorant bliss, version of the world. And it's really interesting because it was written in mid-30s, I think 1935. And so the context is very much, World War One is over. We're looking at World War II, and it's a kind of a bleak view from that historical perspective. But it's like, well, what if this happened, right? Like, what if the world changed in this way? And I guess if you sort of just left it there, you might think, well, that's not fair. That's not a balanced civilization. But the book has an interesting way of sort of saying, like, the mother in this case basically deciding that I don't think this is a balanced view of the world either. It's been helpful, and it's certainly been better than the world that we've come from, but it's still not the way that I think it should be. And so she goes on to sort of explain to her son, who is, like all other men, has been ignorant of the way that the world has been, talks about the history of sort of this male-dominated world, and then this sort of transition, and talks about the wars and from the context historical at that point, and then sort of imagines this transition, and then says, but this isn't the way it should be. I'm telling you in order to start the process of trying to improve this. So it's very interesting, I think, to get like for me, it was the first book that I read on feminism, and it was so interesting because it didn't like shout at me, right? Like, it didn't tell me that I was like doing something wrong. It was set in this like sort of alternate or like future world where you can sort of take yourself out of it, but then like imagine it from this context of her, and from all like the history that the third person narrator explains throughout. But I think there's a couple of quotes in here that I think might make people interested in it a little more than me just kind of rambling about what I think it's about. One is, quote, "They were like people who had, with terrific toil, got themselves up a precipice to a flat place where they could rest and take their breath. But they couldn't rest because what was on top of the precipice simply scared them to death." And then that same skips ahead a little bit. "But because they had conquered nature, the life they had lived struggling up the precipice was now no longer possible. They were on the flat place. There was a horrible dark wood at the top of the cliff where they felt they must be lost. Is there any wonder that hordes of them tried to go back down the precipice? But now they find that the ropes which served them so nobly to help them up the cliff are rotten. The religion, the unquestioned dominance of men over women, and one class over another class, all the ropes have been rotted inside." So that's from page 67. And then there's another one. It's about sort of patriotism and fascism. It says, quote, "They caught their mental diseases, patriotism and fascism and death hysteria in just the same way. It was a morbid growth on the natural love a woman has for the language, climate, and kind of country in which she passed her childhood. What the old men meant by patriotism," old men here referring to men before women ruled, in this kind of like, futuristic view looking back at the 1930s. What the old men meant by patriotism was a feeling that the people of their own country were better than the people of others, and that therefore the others were contemptible and hateful, and it was not wrong to kill them. Patriotism implies fear, and the greater the patriotism, the greater the panic. So in those days, when a country really had the disease badly, the people would believe, think, say, and do the most senseless and amazing things. It's all from page 65. So, it's a good read. It's hard to find. I don't know that like you'd find a new copy. I've only found used copies, but anyone, if you're curious, I will try to find a link to where I got it. Thrift Books is a good place to look. That's the only pick that I have.
Well, sounds awesome. I had never heard of it before, so great.
I think this has been a really full of wonder, a good conversation. I didn't mean to, I feel like that quotes there at the end kind of brought it down there. But I thank you for your time. I think this has been a really useful conversation. And thanks to Katja.
Yes, for putting us in touch.
Yeah, for making the connection there. Wolfgang Schuster, who suggested that I reach out in the first place. And thanks, Felienne, for coming to Elm Town. Tschüss.
Yeah, thanks for having me.